From advertising, branding, to design and experiences, how are we going to use AI to create the future that we want? Join us for breakfast.
Today, we're talking to Calvin. Calvin is a film and commercial director who has decided to embrace AI. His work is really interesting because I think what it does is show the future of where human filmmakers who are talented, curious, and hungry can continue to have a career in an age where AI starts to produce content on its own. His philosophy is to use mostly open source, train model on footage that he owns, and derive a look and a suite of AI technologies that he can then farm out. It's effectively a really interesting way to retain creative control, but also to generate lasting revenue for himself as a filmmaker and a creative. He is very happy to share with us a lot of insights, a lot of the tools that he uses, and really this should be a fascinating podcast for anybody who is in the field of video, moving image, content creation.
So, welcome, Calvin. Lovely to meet you in person. I think one of the areas of AI that feels the most immediate in terms of disruption in everybody's minds is everybody's seen VO, everybody's seen Midjourney. And so I think for a lot of people, LLMs aside, it was what AI could do with images that really struck people and earned the media's attention. But before we dive into that, because I know you're doing a lot of exciting work in that, I'd love to talk a little bit more about your early career. So you grew up in Texas.
Yeah.
And when did you know you wanted to be a filmmaker or work with image?
First off, thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure.
It's an awesome podcast series and concept you've got going, and I'm excited to have the conversation. I started making films because my parents they let me watch TV, but not that much, and they made me go outside, and so making films was just a way to play with my friends when I was really young, and we'd watch silly YouTube videos, and I grew up in that like kids watching YouTube phase.
Yeah.
And I was like inspired by YouTube and Star Wars, and so then I'd take the camera my dad filmed our soccer games with, and we'd go film with that. And I was just lucky. I went to a high school that was a public high school that had a good film program, where my teacher introduced me to a cinematographer in town. And so when I was like 15, I started working for him doing music videos, and then he introduced me to a commercial director. And then from when I was like 16, I was working for this commercial director in Dallas, Stuart Cohen. Mm-hmm. And then I went to school for film. I studied at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah. I studied film production. I dropped out at one point. I studied industrial design at one point, but I ended up finishing with film and writing. Mm-hmm. And then I traveled around a bit during COVID. I went to New York, and then I was working in New York. I was working for a commercial director there, Andrew Wonder, kind of doing a mix of doing all of his director cuts, doing all of his prep with him, doing kind of like the full commercial production process.
Yeah.
And I'd been shooting stills and doing my own commercials kind of simultaneously, and then working for him, seeing how commercials work, and building my own company, doing small commercials, and then doing a mix of branded, that kind of like half documentary, half commercial, shooting, a mix of events and studio stuff for fashion stuff.
So a mix of behind the camera, but also fully computer generated. You were already working in 3D and
No. So this is all traditional production. This is all cameras. No, I hadn't written a line of code in my life. I never opened a 3D software. I only knew Premiere. Mm-hmm. I only knew lighting in a physical space and not in a virtual space. So this was no computer generated stuff at all. I could barely even replace a green screen plate in After Effects. All of my knowledge comes from being behind a physical camera.
Okay. So after your studies, you took a decision that a lot of filmmakers don't do. You thought, I'm going to go explore the world and do some work on the side to pay for my trip. Is that right?
Yeah, I kind of just put my stuff in storage and said I'm going to take a trip for a month, and then just kept going and going and going and going, and was like, okay, well, I can edit. So if I'm on the road, I can do a remote job. And if there's a client that has a week of shooting, I'll go back to New York. And so I was kind of balancing traveling and taking some remote jobs and taking some occasional client work along the way.
Okay. And what kind of work were you doing then remotely?
I was cutting commercials mostly, and then I was also shooting like branded content. And maybe every couple months I'd have a shoot in New York, and I'd just go back for the shoot and then keep going.
And keep going. That. Okay. And so you were at the first time that those first AI packages, the first version of Runway, Comfy UI. When did you catch wind of that? When did you really start to see things and have a bit of a revelation?
I think amidst all of the being away from the digital career life was maybe sometimes good for my mental stimulation and happiness and worldly experiences, but I really did miss, like, it really is an amazing life to have to be making films for any reason in any industry. And so I still really miss that heightened creativity that you get when you're with a group of people and you're all around a camera and every day you're, workshopping shot design and stuff like that. And I was like, man, I still want to make stuff. And I really enjoyed working on a farm and being on my knees and in the dirt and taking walks in the forest and doing all this less digital stuff. But I still felt the need to create. And so I was looking at, how can I make images with less resources? And so I was making Gaussian Splats with an iPhone with a cracked screen with Luma. And then I was taking those Gaussian Splats into the first version of Runway, their first video to video model. And then I was taking an image I made for Midjourney, and I was this simple 3D scene I made just in my kitchen. And then I did a video to video process with Runway, and just made a video of these two people in this room with this light behind them.
So how much of that was in camera and how much of that was processed in AI?
Well, none of it was in camera because the base of the scene was a 3D scene that was captured by, I guess the only part of it that's in camera is the base of the 3D scene is the Gaussian splat was captured by a camera.
Yeah.
And then exported as a splat.
But only to scan.
Only to scan, and it was 2 olive oil bottles. I just needed it so I could have 2 pillars and then move a camera through them is all it was. And then repaint the scene with a generated image, and then do a video to video model using the generative image for a reference. And then I filmed it all on a point and shoot, 2004 Kodak digital CCD camera to make it have that CCD digital grain texture. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was the first thing I ever made that I really felt like, oh, this is something different. I don't think it was good, but I remember being so happy with how it was nothing I had ever seen before. And I showed a lot of my friends who worked in traditional film production, and they're my friends, so they're supportive of me, and they're like, oh yeah, this is cool. But I could tell they weren't excited about some little silly 5-second clip of,
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think it's because a lot of filmmakers it's hard to get into. It's very competitive, but also a lot of filmmakers were kind of control freaks. We're trying so hard to manage the light, the composition to get that perfect shot. And AI is kind of the opposite, right? It's kind of more like a conversation, and you have to be okay with some of the output, but you can't control it in the same way. Do you see it the same way? Was it a pleasant surprise, or did you feel in control of the work?
That instance was a pleasant surprise, and that was really using a bunch of different models and a bunch of different neural networks to make something that was really simple but was really different than a lot of other stuff I'd made before. And so I think that process was really surprising because it was so explorative. Mm-hmm. But I think that AI, if you're going to use a model that's trained on data and you're kind of at the helm of the model, I think you actually have to have a clearer vision of what you want. Because if you're directing a commercial, and you don't need to imagine the whole house, you just location scout and you find a nice house.
Yeah.
And then, you don't need to stitch the fabric on the blanket. You hire a production designer who has good taste, and they go to the prop rental house and they look at the wall of blankets and they pick the blanket, mm-hmm. And so they're not a lot of things that are in the scene, even the lighting, you need to know a little bit of what type of lighting you like, but maybe there's a DP and a gaffer, and they'll do the commercial lighting that they know how to do.
Yeah.
And then ultimately all that stuff is just captured on the day. And I think the production is more of an art of finding something that already exists, and you have to imagine it before you want it. But ultimately, like the images are at the helm of what's happening in the real world. Yeah. And whereas in AI, there's no limits on what can be made, and so you have to know exactly what blanket fabric you want, because you have to write about it and you have to describe it, and maybe that what you want isn't in the model, and so then you have to test it, and then if it's the fabric you want can't be created because it's not enough in the data set, then you have to go back and make that pattern and then train on it and then know how to trigger that training so it happens in the image. So you have to, I think in making images with AI, there's so much horrible stuff made with AI because so many people let the model tell them what to do. And when you do that, the model is looking at, it depends on what model you're using, but if you're using a good model like Flux or like even a closed source model like Kling or something, you're averaging 10 billion images. You know, those models look at so much data. And so you're taking the average of every single image and you're kind of mixing it together. And if you don't tell it what type of blanket to put on the couch, it's going to take the most average looking blanket.
Yeah.
And so it's going to make the most average generic looking people if you can't write about what type of person you want. So you really have to be able to like think about casting even more specifically than you do when you're with a deck. Because if you're doing casting in a traditional form, like you write, oh, we want this type of person, and then you look at all the people that the casting director sends you, and and that's the box you're in, is you're limited to the people that are brought to you. And with AI, it's like, how do you want their bone structure to eye ratio to be? How high do you want their ears to be? Because if you can write about it and you can imagine it and you can train on it and you can build a data set of it, then you can create it. And so you really have to know more exactly what you want. And if you don't, you're just going to get the most generic, boring looking blankets and people and rooms and scenes. And so I think with AI, you actually, to utilize it correctly and to make images that are good, you have to have a more clear vision of what you want.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, so when I did a bit of commercial directing, I found that I think the reason that a lot of directors are tyrants is because you work for 6 months to get a concept across, one pitched and approved. And then you storyboard it, you mood board it, you go through all the pre-production stuff. And then in some cases you have 2 days or 3 days. Mm-hmm. You got 100-person crew in it, even if it's a studio production. And you're trying to achieve within those crazy constraints with a huge team everything that you've been carefully planning for the previous 6 months. And so it's an extreme like human dynamic situation, whereas AI is sort of, it's almost more post-production than it is production, and you're skipping that part of the process. You could almost do pre-production and skip the production part in some respects, because you're generating an image. Do you see what I mean? Is it like?
I think it makes it non-linear. I think that's such a good point. That's why
production basically going?
Yeah, I've been a tyrant too, because you have to be when you spend 3 months telling the clients this is what they're going to get, and then you have to execute it with 100 people in 30 minutes. You know, when the producer's like, hey, you wanted 3 hours, but you only have 30 minutes. Yeah. And, I know you wanted Steadicam, and they're going to build, and they're going to take 10 minutes. So you have 5 minutes to do the shot. Yeah. It's like so ridiculous. And that's why it makes people crazy, and that's why assistant directors have the shortest lifespan of everyone in the film industry, because they have to manage their schedules. Like it makes sense. But I think there's still a clear pre-production, production, and post-production with AI, but I think that there's no limitation on when you do which one, and you can go between the three seamlessly.
Okay.
Like you can, like I'm doing this, I don't know, I'm trying to think how much I can say about it. I'm doing this, I'm making an AI film trailer that's going to be used in sales right now, and for like selling a pitch basically with an AI trailer. And the whole process is we're doing our writing and rewriting the boards while we're editing, while we're face swapping, and while we're generating videos. Like maybe we're generating some videos on the hero shots we know that we like, but then if the producer says, oh, actually we're going to change the time of day on this scene, and maybe this one we can make the costumes dirtier, and so we'll go back, and while we're doing the videos on this one, we're rewriting the shots on the first one.
That's really interesting.
And you know, I'll make all the boards with the model trained on storyboards just to be like, these are the compositions we want, and to find the good seeds that give us the right composition. And then, you know, while I'm training models for looks, then we can even be, going back and rewriting new shots, and then we generate shots, and then we can say, oh, these shots are good, but let's go back into production with these shots and go into post-production with these shots. So you can, there's no reason to stop. It's just how many GPUs can you spin up at a time? Like you could have one GPU running videos, especially if you're using closed source and you're not doing things locally. Like you have all this computer dedicated to generating videos, and then you have all these computers dedicated to generating images, and it's really pretty limitless, and it blurs the lines on the production process.
So it's very interesting the way you describe it, because some of that happens on some movie productions where they're still figuring out the script and some famous lines of dialogue. I watched the 2 Gladiators, and I hadn't realized the first Gladiator movie was shot. They had built part of the Colosseum, but only 3/4 of the script was written. And to me, it seems insane. A $150 million movie, and you're building bits of architecture, and you're still figuring out the words. But actually, it's a better movie, arguably. It's more, to your point, something very visceral with strong emotions. It's got that kind of strength, partly because I think they worked more organically, more non-linear. They had a space, and so the actors and the camera worked together to get the story, get the narrative from that moment. The way you're describing making that trailer or that pitch movie, maybe that's the future of filmmaking, where you have someone who's close to story, maybe someone who's close to performance, and someone who's close to image, and they're using different tools and trying different things until they have this perfect. And then the AI is like the 4th member of the team. And maybe it's a more non-linear, more like graph that happens in this blurred line between pre, post, and prods all mixed together.
I think that's definitely a direction that will be like a new branch of the tree. I don't think the whole tree is going to go in that direction. Like I think that mediums and how they evolve are not like a destructive or replacing growth pattern. Like I think that's why people still paint with oil paintings, because even though people still draw with charcoal, like people still use the oldest mediums ever. And so I think just because like there's this new way of making films, I don't think we'll ever erase the traditional path of making films. I think it's just one more branch on the tree. But I definitely think that branch will exist. But the other big difference of making motion with AI is that it's the best way to control the image is with an open source model pipeline where you can do your own training, where you're not just limited to what prompt can I write, but where you control the images before the prompting happens with building your own data sets and making your own training sessions. And then making images in an open source pipeline, and then using those images in a closed source pipeline with like something has the compute power that you need, like VO or Kling. And maybe their model is more too generic and you can't change the model because it's closed source. But if you give it an image that you made in an open source pipeline, so that's kind of the process right now as it stands in this format, in this, making a trailer format. There's also this other, 3D animation process, kind of like something similar I was doing for Left Field. And that's kind of a different branch of the tree. But for this process is actually more you work with stills.
Yeah.
You make all the stills first, not just the boards. Like you make the boards and then you kind of repaint the boards with your models. And so you keep the compositions. But it's all working with stills.
Right.
And so it's like, which is cool.
Which
actually.
is kind of like filmmaking, where you all start with storyboards.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you go on location and you shoot the different angles that you might have. You relay those out. So there's also, the thing that I think was interesting, that the more we work with AI and our tools, is those models have been trained on images that are an output of post-production. So like a Z-depth map, or even prompting and saying dolly in. Those are all terms, and those are all assets that are created as a byproduct of the film industry. And so the AI needs to be spoken in a language that actually filmmakers, traditionals, have used, and post-production people. Like the work we did together for Salesforce is really interesting to see how it's generating a Z depth. We can do stuff in 3D, but then it generates its own Z depth, and then it uses the Z depth it's created to create that asset.
Yeah, but you know what's funny is the model we made depth maps of the outputs, making a depth map with AI instead of taking a depth map directly from the 3D scene. And what's funny is like to do that, we have a model. It's an open source model. It's trained by this guy Phil, who works for CompUI, who's a really good model trainer, and he has a model that's trained on depth maps. And if you just type depth map, make a depth map without that LoRa, without that model in the pipeline, it doesn't know how to do that, because whoever trained Stable Diffusion 1.5 didn't add depth maps into the data set and write depth map every time. They didn't see a film with film grain and write film grain. Like if you write film grain, it doesn't add film grain because it wasn't labeled in the data set. And if they didn't train it with that knowledge, then it's not there. You can't just make it. So the depth map is only there because somebody saw that the depth maps, you can't make them by prompting, so they have to train a model side by side on an output that's a depth map in the normal image, and then say this is the depth map that this isn't, and then boom, now you have a model that when you type depth map, it makes a depth map. But it's funny, like that's not something that's built into Stable Diffusion.
It's a workaround in a way.
It's a workaround that somebody created.
Yeah.
It's also a good note that like one of the beauty about AI compared to other traditional methods is I think filmmaking, because it's so honed into so few days and it's so competitive and you're pitching against other people for so much money, and if you don't get that job, then that's 3 months where you don't have that amount of money for yourself or for the company, and so it's so competitive and it's so cutthroat, and so because of that, it's a really gate-kept industry, and like most DPs won't tell you whether they used 1/8 or 1/4 glimmer glass filter on the lens.
Right.
But AI, like this depth map model, is something that someone created and put on the internet, and you can take it and you can retrain it and you can use it, and you can. It's so much less gate kept, and it's so much and it's so open source, and a lot of the even if you're doing a client project, a lot of the tools you're still working with are open source tools, and it's so much stuff is built on what other people have shared openly, and so it's an interesting space too, because then you have like a dilemma of if everyone's just gatekeeps everyone in AI and no one shares anything anymore, then all progress stops, because it's all built on the progress that everyone shares. Like CompUI is open source, like it runs on Python. All the models there, you can download and plug them in. Anyone can train them. But also, if you open source everything and you don't gatekeep anything at all, then you don't make any money. So you have to sometimes draw the line and say, for this project, we're going to take these open source tools and we're going to build something, and it's not going to be open source. This is going to be our proprietary IP.
But also for brands too, right? Yeah. Brands are going to, you can imagine that they have brand guidelines, brand assets, custom fonts, and maybe they'll have brand models that are trained on their own identities. And that's something that I've done before, and that's something that's already existing, and it's an interesting, legal discussion too. It's definitely part of the conversation. Are there some brands that that are vocal about it, that have outright said, this is our model and it trains images for our own content?
Not that I can talk about.
Okay.
But that
can you tell us what sector?
No. Okay. I don't want to get in trouble. But that happens for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine one, but I'm not saying, I don't think it's related to you, but I can imagine a company that relies on a lot of photography of, companies that do furniture, for example, and IKEA would be incredibly well suited to like training a model. It's a very typecast, well formatted system, right?
Oh yeah. And
we spoke to someone actually recently who worked for Airbnb.
And even with people's faces, like I think like that's such a I think there was a law called the Take It Down Act that passed that made like Civet AI, which is a big hub it's a repository for people to post models on. They used to have models of like celebrities' faces, and then there was a law that passed that made a celebrity's face and an AI model their own IP, and so all that stuff had to get taken down. Now those models still exist, and you can still train them, and people still are, especially if it's running locally. Like you can't come to someone's house and say, you're not allowed to have that model, take it off your laptop. Like once it's on your computer, it's on your computer. But there is like this like legal back and forth where like this technology will make something possible, and then there'll be some restrictions on it that are usually justified and understandable, and then the technology adapts, and then more restrictions. So that's kind of how it's there's this legal side of it that's partially constraining and partially enabling as well. And I think, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm curious if because you still got a whole career ahead of you, but I'm curious, when you talk to people who are now in college or considering filmmaking, what would you say is the filmmaking of the future? How do you frame what a filmmaker is now?
I mean, I think a filmmaker is someone who makes a film, no matter what tools they use. I mean, if you want to get really technical with it, it's someone who makes a film on celluloid. And so if you were looking at the word film and it has to be shot on film, like the word itself, then making a movie on a digital camera doesn't make you a filmmaker. So I think if you want to say, if you're going to say making a movie on a digital camera makes you a filmmaker, and you're going to not be withheld of the bound of the word film, meaning that it comes from a celluloid material, then you also have to open it further past the digital camera into any digital medium. So I think if you're going to be a traditionalist and say you're only a filmmaker if you make film on film, then I can respect that person will also say that you're not a filmmaker if you use a digital camera or AI.
Yeah.
But if you're calling someone a filmmaker for using a digital camera, then you should also call someone a filmmaker for making any film.
Yeah.
And I think that some people maybe will make films fully AI. Some people will use AI models in a VFX workflow, and it's part of it, whether it's for something as simple as the rotoscoping, or if it's like in a 3D pipeline where you're repainting, kind of like we did, where you're repainting depth maps and with control nets and using a model to kind of light and texture the scene.
Yeah.
Some people, maybe they'll just use it for pre-visualization. I think it's a really amazing, even if someone is anti-AI for production, I think it's a really amazing pre-visualization tool for shot sequencing, and you can kind of make your boards, and even if it's just a black and white board, you can cut them together and then see, oh, these are the shots we need, and then you can go into your scene and shoot them that way. So it's
it's interesting because I think the definition of filmmaking has definitely evolved. I mean, I remember when Toy Story came out, and there was also this, it's not real cell animation anymore. We've lost something. So there's that feeling of somehow a cherished thing is going.
But people perpetuate that because their life their job relies on it. Like, I don't think that's such a rational thing to argue. I understand when people are like, oh, it's not filmmaking anymore because you're not using all these people in a room together collaborating for this human connection experience. But someone who says that about digital cameras, you could look back and that person could say the same thing. The film person could say the same thing.
Well, non-linear editing and linear editing.
It's not the same when you have a premiere and you're not doing it the real way. Like, it's always like this generation pointing their finger at this generation, then this generation saying, no, we're the right way. The new people are doing it wrong. Right. And then the next people saying, no, the new people are doing it wrong. But that mentality is only perpetuated because because they make a living on saying that they're filmmakers. And if that is threatened, then... So I think a lot of that mentality is an emotional response to having people's...
feeling like their livelihood is going.
Yeah, and I understand that. So I don't blame anyone for having that mentality, because it's a competitive industry and like we all want to work, So I don't...
You made a really interesting point, because I think, so if you look just at the business of advertising and content creation, right? 2020, 30% of the total ad budget, all of it, everything, media, content, 30% was already swallowed up by 4 of the big tech. This year, 2025, it's 50%. And so a lot of people in the industry are going, democratization. The pitch is that democratization, AI is affording democratization of the tool set. But that's just the pitch, because in reality, brands will just go to a Meta and say, I want content that's going to tap to all these different groups, and it'll customize the commercial, it'll do it in real time, it'll A/B test it in different regions, and it'll just generate it on the fly in giant mega data centers that they're building. And I can't imagine that that's not a path that the industry is going. However, what you said was really interesting, because, and I hadn't thought about it that way. You mentioned that you take Comfy UI, if you have a powerful enough machine, you can train your own model that then you own, trained on your unique eye, in some respects, we spoke about this earlier, your auteur's lens, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe the model can start to see the way you see the world, and people come to you because of your ability to storytell, but also because you've trained a model that can then execute on your vision, which is kind of like what filmmakers have always done when they've picked their preferred partners, because they know their DOP sees the world, and they know their sound mixer and their composer. So maybe you're effectively creating a studio in a box type of thing that is still yours, and that the big tech won't be able to just auto-generate.
Yeah. I think
there is some gatekeeping.
Yeah, I think to touch on open and closed source, like I sometimes do closed source work where, you know, I'm taking open source tools and I am proprietizing them for myself. And then I also, but I also realize that if everyone were to do this, progress would stop. So I also think if I'm doing that, I think it's part of my work that I think is important is I also do model training that's open source. And I also train stuff I have a photo model that I trained on my photography. It was the first model I trained. And that's something I posted for free. I'm not good at proprietors that. Like if there's not someone telling me this is a private IP project and you're not allowed to give it away, I try to do as much open source work as I can. I try to make contributions to open source projects on GitHub. I do research and I publish the research. Like I try to balance the open and closed source because I think that's like the good karma of like, yes, we need to make money, we need to proprietarize, and we need to close source things. But also if everyone does that, then progress stops and there's nothing to build on top of. So if we're doing this, it's also good to do
Or
both.
progress happens in big tech campuses.
Yeah.
And it's exclusively for big tech.
Yeah, and I think that will happen, and you know there'll be this meta model, and they'll be able to make whatever the commercial they want, you know, in the future, and they won't need a whole filmmaking team, and then they're going to make so many commercials. And I think you're right; that's the direction it's going to go. It's going to get so easy for these huge tech companies to have such high quality models running on huge H100 GPU clusters that it's gonna tank and really flip production on its head. It's going to make a lot of this stuff less valuable. As someone who just wants to make their own products from my own mind, and like that doesn't really like bother me. Like I'm kind of like I want to skip advertisements a lot of times anyway, even though I make them a lot.
Yeah.
So if I see the ad world totally have to take a shift and get turned upside down, like I don't think that's the worst thing. Like I think most people want to see the ad world change and are sick of generic advertising and need things to be more challenging, so that way more like need more challenges on the on that industry, so that way it has to evolve and make something new, you know.
Well, AI is particularly good at the generic. There are some brands, and we've mentioned this, who have models trained to do brand characters or to generate certain type of library content that they need. And that is just happening. And it's on brand, it's cost effective, they can do it quickly. And those elements, those traditional advertising revenue streams are going, if not gone, in some sectors for some clients.
Well, they're not completely gone because you still have to have someone train those models and update the models when there's a new training platform.
But why not do it themselves? Why don't the brands, why do they need to bill an agency to do that?
Yeah, you're right. So maybe it goes internal. Like maybe in the future, the agencies will say, hey, if our product is no longer the art director bringing the chair to you, maybe our product is training the model that you're going to use to make the chair, and we can train a model better than you can do it. Why does a client outsource production to an agency in the first place? Because the agency is more specialized and can do what the client can't do. So if you can, so I think maybe the agency world will have like an AI. It was only a cost issue.
It was only a cost issue. It's only because it was too costly for in-house teams to have entire production studio and photo retouching, and it was just too costly when they only do a catalog once a year. That was the reason why they did it. But if you can generate your entire online catalog of furniture, jewelry, clothing, you don't need to go to the agency to do that. I'd be very surprised if this doesn't happen, if we don't end up in a position where most big brands have their own models for their own generic content. But the thing that gives me hope or makes me excited about who we are as a business and the stuff that we do is I think you're still going to need the change agents, because sure, for 2 years, 3 years, you'll run the catalog in a certain style or the content or the whatever, but there are always inflection points where a brand needs to stay fresh and to reinvent itself. And I don't think a model like the IKEA model that's been doing all its furniture for all their catalogs, will it come up with a net new campaign that makes a whole new audience reappraise the brand? I'm not sure.
I think there's just going to be a higher volume of production if it can be less costly. Like, I think I think there'll be a higher volume of production. In some ways, it's interesting that you said that there's certain line items that you can't even bill for anymore because they're like, now we do
not
that
with
ourselves.
every client, but there's a lot.
But you know, I also think that it's a disruptive technology, and I don't want to be too optimistic and say every company is going to keep all of its employees the same it is, and we're all just going to switch from using this tool to AI, and everyone will still be employed the same. Like, I don't want to be too optimistic. Like, I definitely think that traditional jobs, like in VFX pipelines, like rotoscope artists, are going to be done with AI, and
image libraries.
Yeah,
would you really invest? You know, Bill Gates bought one of the big, I forgot what they're called, one of the big image libraries, or he created one at first, if I remember the story, so that he could have exciting, unique images in his giant mansion somewhere.
What in a real image library?
Yeah, and then he had such a big bank that he turned it into an advertising platform.
I think that's a good idea.
But I don't know if I would invest in an image library bank anymore.
Well, no, because that's a data set, and that's still more valuable. The interesting thing
until the model's been trained on it.
Oh no, because as soon as you trained a model on something that's but still as this. So there's this phenomenon on the internet, I forget what it's called, where eventually, I think already more than half the images on the internet are AI generated. Mm-hmm. And all those AI generated images, for the most part, are trained on models that are made with real images. But eventually, most of the models are going to be trained on images that aren't real. They're trained on images that are made with AI. And that's called distillation, when you train a model on something that's a result of a trained model. And the more you distill a model, the more imperfect it gets. Even if you think it's an amazing model making perfect photoreal outputs, and then you say, okay, well, these photos look great, let's just train a model on these photos. And our real data set we can have a synthetic data set. And there's benefits to that. Like, that's how you make models faster, and that's how you make models weirder. Mm-hmm. But also at the same time, as soon as you distill a model more and more and more, the less valuable, the less good it looks.
Right.
And so the value remains in the original data set. And so I think there is value if you're holding a data set, and if you intend on training on it, I think that's valuable, because
companies like Meta, for example, where people are going to continue to share stuff on Instagram.
Yeah, they're training on everything.
But they're training on fresh material all the time.
Exactly.
It's maybe companies that don't have that window. I don't know, like at Amazon or something, it might struggle a bit more. But their models in principle will stay fresh.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon, if they don't have...
Your curation, what you do is you curate because you have a taste for something, or you have a type of... You mentioned you'd like lighting that's imperfect, that by all other measurements is not the right way to light something. Yeah. But over time, you're building a library that has your taste stamped on it, and you can potentially train a model, and then that's a valuable asset.
Yeah, and I think it's like an interesting parallel if we look at the music industry becoming digital. Before the music industry was digital, there were a lot less music. There was a lot less music being made because it needed so much more production. Mm-hmm. And so because there was less music to be made, there wasn't as a bigger demand for DJs because there was less to curate. And as soon as you have this digital music boom, suddenly the need for DJs is as big as the need for the music creation itself, because there's so much music out there now that it's now a new job just to curate that music, because there's more than you could listen to.
Yeah.
And you could argue that, yes, there's like AI algorithm DJs, and I have my Spotify, auto-generated playlist too. But ultimately, like, the most interesting things will come to you from from a human. And so I think AI is similar. It's like there's going to be so much data. There's so much data out there that if your job is in the realm of model training, then it's kind of in akin to what a DJ is to someone playing a violin. Like you're not there with the camera, but you're looking at every image with the camera and saying which one is right for this place. And so it's just it's the art of curation, but also knowing what you want and why you want it. And if I'm making images for this trailer, even if it's just a close-up of a guy's shoe, I'll make 1,000 images of a close-up of a guy's shoe, and then I have to decide why is 999 better than 998, and why is 751 the best one? Like what tiny? So you really have to be super good at observing and saying, why is this one good?
Yeah.
Now someone with the camera might be able to make that image, and that's a different skill because that's the art of capturing and seeing what's good and framing it, and not the art of looking at a bunch of things and curating what's good from a.
Totally.
So it's just a different skill set, but they have the same result.
So let's when we had our early chat and we were talking about working on this project together at Left Field, it was interesting. We were having a chat, and I could sense that you're obviously clearly building your business and your career, and so you're always thinking about. And correct me if you feel this is a misrepresentation, but you're always thinking about this is my time versus this is my IP versus this is my footage and my copyright. And I think that's quite interesting because I remember when I started as a director, I'd try and protect my ideas, but it was impossible. I'd pitch stuff and then I'd see the commercial get done, but they didn't want me to direct it or so. But when you were talking about it, you weren't just talking about it like a director who's trying to protect his ideas or his eye, or you were also talking about it kind of like a software company.
Yes, yeah, because the product of models and stuff, it all runs on Python, and so the product before it's an image, the image in the raw form is a workflow of models and text encoders and VAEs that are all wrapped in its most raw form. It's just Python. The image can be, if the image has the metadata in it, like you can see all of the Python that was used to create that image, and then anyone who has that, that block of code can make that exact same image. And so that block of code becomes really valuable. And so, and it's actually like the frustrating thing is if you send someone a treatment, they know how to do that production, even if you give them the idea. And so like they can just go make your idea without you. And it's really hard to protect ideas. But one of the good things about AI workflows is you can protect them because I can say, look, this is the image I got, and this is the workflow I'm using, and I can just keep it on my computer, and or I can sell it to you, but I can make this image, and they can't make that image if they don't have that block of code. So it's a mix of this old traditional production mind of looking at images and how to assign them together to make an output, but it's also this new IP protection of software, like it's like a tech company at the same time.
So in a weird way, I mean, again, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but when I was a young film director, all I had to exchange was my time for money. I had to have a good portfolio of work, and trying to get those first few commercials to build the credibility was tough. But then after that, you're exchanging time. In a way, there's a weird way to look at it, the way you're saying it. It's like you're still exchanging your time, but potentially for the next generation of filmmakers and creatives, they're also packaging IP into the mix, which is kind of like a first time. A first, potentially.
Yeah, it's a first for me, and it's a first for clients I'm doing it with, for them to. You kind of have seen this in the animation world in the past, where someone will make a new animation tool,
a plugin or something.
Yeah, a plugin like that, and they'll use it for a job. And
but those were more like image engineers. They weren't exactly creatives or artists. Some of them had scripts in After Effects and stuff like that.
A lot of people who use AI also aren't creatives and artists, and a lot of people in commercial aren't creative and artists. Like I don't think that those are fully overlapping. Like you can make these tools without being an artist, or you can be an artist without making these tools, and you can do both.
No, I know, but I think the debate was that for the first time, I think a lot of people feel the creative sector, and I would put myself in that bucket, the creative industry as a whole is potentially reaching an existential moment, right? Because if the brands and the marketers can generate something that meets specifically what predictive analytics says it should look like, why do I need to put a young human who's probably going to show up with a hangover, who might be brilliant on occasion, throw him into the mix in my $1 million campaign? Why? You know what I mean? And I wouldn't have recruited myself in my 20s.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. And I think this is like...
But you're saying it the other way around. You're kind of saying, well, yes, that they're still, you're bringing the human risk element, but they're also coming with a piece of software, a piece of IP that they own. Young filmmakers now are not just coming to exchange their time, they're coming to exchange time plus package an IP, so a piece of software, a piece of Python, plus a model that they've trained. So in some respects, if you're a young filmmaker now and your dream is to work with image and moving image, yes, maybe you won't get paid as well to show up on a camera. Maybe that job is kind of going, but that's not to say that you don't have a career path if you've taken the time to hone in on your taste, get some life experience, and train a model that can then repeat what it is that you think is so special about your unique eye. And that's what you go and you go barter with brands and...
Yeah, exactly. Train a model, build a workflow, and then curate those outputs. And then, that whole process is I think, going to be a lot more common.
Are there any tool sets or things that you think are right now the industry needs to focus on that because they provide you the most creative freedom, they also allow you to build your IP. What are the tool sets that you think are right now the most valuable for independent creatives?
Before I want to touch on one more thing before we talk about tools, about the if a brand can do this, why hire a human? And this is just my esoteric, hippie belief about the difference between human and AI is that, there's artificial intelligence, AI is definitely intelligent. It's questionably conscious. Maybe it's conscious, maybe it's not. That's the big debate. It's definitely intelligent. Does it have its own sense of awareness inside of a language model? I have no idea. That's a big debate that happens. It's not really one I'm super interested in. And then there's also the difference between conscious and sentience. And does that AI, maybe it's self-aware and maybe it's conscious, but is it sentient? Does it exist in a different realm? Do you believe a person exists in a different realm? Just because something is conscious and intelligent doesn't mean it exists in a different realm. And what value does that bring to that entity itself? I don't believe that AI has any sentience, even if it's questionably conscious. I believe that an AI is only existing in this world and it's only tapped into this world. But I think if you're an artist and you're tapped into your core of an artist, you're tapped into something that's outside of your body, and that's where the best ideas come from, and that's where the mystical ether of creative inspiration comes from. And you can, use AI. I think so.
I mean, it's
it's my hippie esoteric belief.
I know, but you could probably, feed into an AI a movie, and then look at references from the prior decades where you could find same shot, same frame, similar dialogue. What we think comes out from the ether, there's a part of it that just has entered our subconscious. We might have caught a glance of something. We don't know our mind registered it. And then it shows up in our creative work. I've always felt that actually, I don't know how much of it, I think there's a lot of it comes out completely from me. I think I'm a conduit for ideas, but I don't think I'm the point source of ideas. It's my lived experience. And I know that had I had a very different life experience and I'd watched a lot more different movies in my teenagers, maybe I'd have an appetite for slightly different things. I think the mind is a complex box that mixes emotion, that mixes intellect and how you were brought up and a couple other things. But you accumulate. In a way, we're all models.
Yeah,
we've been fed
neural networks. Yeah, we're biological neural
data.
networks instead of machine neural networks. We work
and then what we
similar.
output is based on what we were trained on.
And if anything, it's funny because like a human in their life maybe sees 10 million images max if they're living in the modern day and they've, lived a full life and look at a lot of images. An AI model is trained on billions of images. So humans are more specific and an AI model is more generic. And every time you see a Picasso painting, it's 1/10 millionth maybe of your data set. Whereas if it's part of an AI data set, it's 1/10 billionth. And so every time you see something, it's actually to you, it's more influential than it would be to a model, because we have a smaller capability for data sets. But I do believe that that humans are conduits for ideas, and if you're tapped into that, the ideas that come to you will be something that couldn't have been created in AI. Now you could take all the ideas that have been conjugated and used as the ideas that have come out of the ether and come through humans into the world. You could train a model on that, but and we will. But then there's the next idea that comes out of the ether that isn't that model. And that's where the human is special, is because we are the conduits that bring in new data to the models. You can train a model on everything that's out there, but there's still going to be things that come to you that aren't inside of that model because we're attached to this thing, so to some other ether that the AI isn't attached to.
Right.
So and it requires a little bit of this like abstract, metaphysical, esoteric thinking to buy into that. And I don't have any, stake in the game whether other people think that's true or not. Like if you think that's stupid, that's fine. Like I have no.
Well, there's no way one way or the other to prove
exactly.
It
So that's just my opinion. But that's my opinion, and that's what drives me to keep writing my own stuff and to keep making my own stuff. Is because, and even though I train models, I believe that I'm better than any model that I can train because I'm connected to something that the AI isn't connected to.
Yeah.
And to me, that's why I'm an artist and the AI is the tool, and there's no overlap between those two things.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a good section to talk about tools now.
Yeah, all right, let's do some tools. And then also, I want to make sure that we take some time, just before we close, I've got some current affair questions to ask you about where things are going. It'd be great to get your opinion. Let's talk a little bit about tools. When I started my career, it was clear. For me, it was Autodesk packages. So I was 3ds Max. I was, at the time, it was the DSLRs. Where the rage, I played with a 35mm and all that stuff, but that was on the decline. So it was DCLRs because you get the film look. And then it was nonlinear editing, so it was the whole Adobe packages. What has changed now? If you're 19 and you're just 18 out of high school, what are the things that you should just plunge yourself into, would you recommend?
What's changed and what's the new tools? I think it's also important to know. I think the most important tool is what hasn't changed, and it's writing, and it's the pen, and it's what you can, the most simple connection from your mind to when I make this whole AI trailer with all these different models and tools chained together. It still starts with the same shot list template that I use when I'm making a music video. Yeah. I'm still writing about, this is the quality of light, this is direction of the light, this is the time of day, this is what the talent is wearing, this is the props they have in their hand, this is the framing, this is the composition. Like, so if you can't write about all those things, there's no purpose of having all these tools. If you can't clearly define what you want with a pen and a paper, those tools are useless to you, and you're just going to make generic stuff that looks what everyone else does. So I think to use these tools, you have to have a really big vocabulary and a really specific understanding of what you want. You have to be able to write it as the same way that if you wanted to write to a production designer what you want the room to look like, you have to write to a production designer. You still have to write. Now you just have to write to a model. So that's the most important tool. It's the same tool that's always been. The new tools, I think the most important tool, the one that I use the most is Comfy UI, the software. It's open source. For stills generation, you can use any open source model. You can plug it in there. You can do your taxes in Comfy UI. You can do rotoscoping in Comfy UI. You can do background replacement in Comfy UI. But I think it's really good for generating stills and for building automation workflows. You can do 2D animation automation workflows in it. You can do 3D remasking and control net. You can do image generation. You can do it's such a flexible open source program that I think
plug in multiple models.
Yeah. It's multi-model. It's fully open source. It's based on Python, and inside of that, there's so much you can do. So I think as far as open source goes, Comfy UI is like the it's so flexible and you can do so much with it. Inside of Comfy UI, I think the models that are really big right now is WAN. Everyone talks about WAN for video. I think WAN is really groundbreaking. It still looks a little bit like lo-fi version of closed source model. Like if you use like something like Kling or Veo, it's going to look better. But I think the open source stuff is going to catch up to the closed source stuff. So I think WAN just released 2.2. You can train LoRa's for motion and image texture, and you can do image enhancing and upscaling, and you can do image to video. You can do a video to start in the last frame. You can chain those together. You can build your whole workflow. You can do 2D stuff or 3D stuff. Like, I think for video models that are open source, WAN is super explosive and has gained a lot of traction in the AI community, and it's kind of what everyone has started talking about now. So I definitely think WAN is going to go up and be as good as Kling and stuff like that eventually, and we're going to be able to have,
because users are sharing their data back, their training model.
Yeah, exactly, and and the model itself is open source, so you can build it into a workflow. You're not just limited to, like with Google, you just have a prompt box and add an image. So I think for video models inside of Comfy UI, WAN. I think for photo models, Flux from Black Forest Labs is amazing. A lot of people still like Stable Diffusion, and SDXL I think is still a great model, and SD 1.5 is what we used for. It's like a legacy model. It's an old version of Stable Diffusion that looks super weird and unique, and it's not trying to be like this photoreal like WAN stuff. So there's still these old legacy models that have their own place and that are cool. Flux used to have Flux Dev. They just released Kriya, which is an awesome image model. They also released Context, which is an image in painting and editing model that's super amazing. I think for training and cloud compute, like RunPod is amazing for having, you can spin, 5 H100s at a time in different parts of the world.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, and you can do it for a couple bucks an hour, and then you can I think cloud computing is a really important part of the tech infrastructure that supports all this. I think companies like RunPod are really ahead of the game. I think there's other niche private companies doing cloud computing. I think that's really relevant. And AI toolkit for training. Yeah. Inside of RunPod, I use a lot, and that's like a really common one for training. It's from Ostris. Repositories like GitHub and Hugging Face and Civit are really important for the collection of all this data, not just the tools and the use of it. And then all the closed source models, and they have their own strengths and weaknesses. Like there's Kling and Veo, which I think are the best for making like photorealistic image to video stuff. There's Higgsfield, which is good for like crazy special effects. There's Sora, which is good for like editing and tweaking. There's Runway, which kind of has this plethora of like tools like rotoscoping and slow motion, all this neural network based stuff that's like how to edit and output once it's already there. They have their own model too. There's Pika, there's Midjourney, which is a lot of people are using, and Midjourney seems great. There's Rev. There's so many closed source tools that are all just kind of like constantly throwing punches and releasing new models and saying we're the best, we're the best, we're the best. And then there's all the open source stuff, which is kind of like building on itself, and everyone's like, we have this, now we're giving it to you, and we're building on this. Now we have this, and we're building on this. So it's two different sectors. I think video is always going to be better from closed source, and I think images are a lot of times going to be better from open source. And so I think it's always a good pipeline if you're.
But you use usually the images as a starting frame for motion still.
For one pipeline, that's a pipeline to make a video. Yeah. Or you could have like we did with Left Field Labs, we have a 3D model that's made by the client's 3D team, and then we have a rigger working in Maya to do the animation, and then we have a compositor working in After Effects, and then we have the person doing the AI, repainting of that 3D scene with the texture. And it's kind of like the Comfy UI portion just kind of is swapped in where Cinema 4D would normally be. And then it gets recomposited with more assets, on the outside and something like that. So, or it can just, it doesn't have to be like this rigid thing where, you have to start with an image to make a video. It can also be part of a traditional 3D pipeline. Right. Or it can be just using your pre-vis and you have a totally standard production. Or it can be have a totally standard production and you have an AI pipeline just to do some of the VFX and to do some of the in-painting and to do set expansions. Like, it's a really flexible tool. So I think that because it can do so many things, I think young people should think about, what do I want to make? And just assume that anything is possible, instead of looking at the tools and be like, what can the AI do well, and then let me just pump out a bunch of that stuff. I think the AI is really inspiring because there's so much limitlessness on what type of images anyone can create now. And so I think it's also important to go back to that first step with the pen and the paper and think, what do I want to make if I can make anything? And that's what's valuable, because the tools are there,
right,
to do whatever you want to do. And the tools are updating so fast that it's like you can't keep up with all of them. So it's kind of like, if you really want to do 3D work, then learn the 3D tools. If you really want to do image to video and pitch decks, then just learn the image generation tools. It's so much to keep up with. So I think it's good to know what tools do what, and then what do I want to do, and then from those two pieces of information you can decide this is the tool I'm going to use.
Right. Fantastic. So thank you for that. And let's
that was enough.
that's a lot.
I told you I could blabber. I gotta
That's great.
slow
That's
down.
amazing. That's amazing. No, it's really
it's like what's in my head all day.
but it's also really refreshing to see someone who's genuinely excited and passionate about it.
Yeah.
I think what I'd love to do before we close is just to hit a couple things that are happening at the very big levels in the industry, in the movie and that kind of stuff. So
David Ellison, who's now running Paramount Skydance, he made a statement recently in Business Insider and said, AI shouldn't scare Hollywood. It should free them to tell bolder stories. Does that resonate? Do you agree? Do you think Hollywood should look at AI with that lens?
I think it's good to frame the use of new tools away from emotionally charged fear and into what can we do with them, the cat's out of the box, how can we use these tools. And I think regardless of what Hollywood wants to do, Hollywood is made up of a bunch of individual people. And I think any individual, whether you're working for a big studio or whether you're an independent artist, should be excited that there's more tools for you to work with to make more things. So I think it's yes, I like that Hollywood could be excited about it. I'm sure they won't be, because the labor unions are losing work. And I think that will be what drives the fear emotional response in Hollywood and how it's perceived. But I think more importantly, it should be exciting to people who aren't in Hollywood. Like, now you don't need a big studio to do this stuff. Now you don't need all this production infrastructure. So yeah, maybe Hollywood's excited, but the people who aren't in Hollywood should be even more excited.
Great. And then, so Jim, Cameron, you didn't mention, I don't think you mentioned Stability AI. Did you?
I did. I was talking about SD15 and SD-XL.
That's true.
Inside of Company Y.
So James Cameron has joined the board.
Oh, cool.
And he apparently is already make rumblings that his next movies might be using AI in some dramatic form. What do you think that means for big spectacle movies? The Avatars, the Marvels, that kind of stuff. They're $150 to $300 million movies. Is that going to change big spectacle movie? And what do you see happening in that space?
It's not going to change big spectacle movie. It's going to change how big spectacle movies are perceived. And so big spectacle movies are going to be a dime a dozen. And so people are going to be sick of them. And I think that's going to make less demand for them. And I think that's great. I think we need more movies that aren't big spectacle. And I would like to see big spectacle movies kind of tank and burn a little bit, and people to want more independent, emotional, like indie drama, real life style feeling content. Like, I think it's threatening for that industry for sure. I think what really changes is how people perceive it if it's so much more consumable and there's so much more out there, more than there already is.
Yeah.
Like, people are already getting sick of Marvel films. Imagine when your 3-year-old son can type in the Marvel film he wants, and you don't even have to go to the movie theater to see it. So I think that will tank that industry, push it in the direction of tanking for the better of the consumer.
Okay, and then I watched The Brutalist recently. Have you watched The Brutalist?
No, I haven't.
Very, very, very interesting movie. Long, very interesting filmmaking. I think you'll love the photography also. There was a bit of a scandal around it because cast members were struggling with their Hungarian accents. And so they used AI to change their voice and to get the right lip syncing so that it was accurate to the right kind of Hungarian with the right accent. So it made it feel very authentic. Even when they spoke English, they used AI to enhance the Hungarian accent. But people were outraged that they were correcting using AI actors' performance. Again, do you think that's, it's more because of the unions, because that's how we make our money, that's a threat? Or is there an artistic reason why we should be outraged about this?
I don't think it makes sense to be outraged about any piece of media. Like, the worst case scenario is some actor loses a job, and like I'm gonna wake up and eat my breakfast in the morning, whether that happens or not. So like, I'm not gonna be outraged, even if I lose a job. I really try to stay away from rage bait and from rage provocative speaking and writing. So I don't think anyone should be outraged about that. I understand why they're upset about it. I think that the use of AI models for voices are particularly exciting for dubbing in different languages, and maybe not like I see why people are upset about correcting an actor with a model. I don't really care. I think if it makes it easier for the Hungarian people to understand and they watch it more, like, good for them. I think it's really exciting. It's another tool worth mentioning is 11 Labs, how you can now train a model on a voice, and then you can take that same voice and dub it in any language. And now, like, it's an expensive service to have your film, especially if it's an independent film and you don't have a lot of money in post. Even on big studio films, they're not available in every single country around the world, because like dubbing a film in 200 languages is really tedious. And there's also a distribution factor that stops that from happening too. But it's really cool that now you can make an indie film, but you can also make that indie film, if it's in English, now someone can watch it in Vietnamese, and now someone can watch it in, like any language you can think of. Suddenly there's less of a communication barrier between the artist and their audience. And language is such a big barrier. And I think as people who speak English, like, we don't realize that, but there's so much content around the world that's in one particular language, and that's really watched by those one particular people of that one particular language, because maybe those people aren't English speaking, and maybe that's the only stuff they have to watch. And so there's this huge market of, and it's really untapped because it's all these tiny niche markets of all these different languages. And I think that's going to open up a lot, because suddenly it's not cost counterproductive to make your film dubbed in this weird niche language, and it would have been in the past.
And
So
the lip syncing is perfect.
yeah, and the lip syncing is amazing. That's another thing for tools that are good for. So I think voice dubbing and cloning in general is exciting. I think people might use it in a way that's a little annoying, like correcting how people speak. But I'm going to spend less time getting upset about people dubbing somebody and more time redubbing my own films.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so the other one I think that's interesting, Vanity Fair. Apparently most of the big awards, according to Vanity Fair, are locking down guidelines around award submissions, and anything that isn't human-made, in their view, is not going to qualify for submissions for things like the Oscars and other big awards. Is that, do you think also that's pandering to an industry? Should we accept everything as an award? Should there be a different category?
What if they can't tell?
Well, that's the point. I mean, they're basically saying,
Like, what if like?
but then that's cheating, isn't it?
I mean, it's not cheating, because it's a fictional rule made up by a fictional institution saying this is what you're allowed to do. So it's like, if you don't follow their rules, it's not really cheating, because it's like they just made up their rules. So I don't think it's...
Well, there were nature photography awards.
Yeah.
Where some people, AI generated these amazing pictures that throw dolphins. And
Yeah.
And they got caught. And so, but that's because I think they were disingenuous. They were sort of masquerading that this was a real picture they had taken. But what do you think about...
I think that's like a special instance, like something like nature photography, documentary photography. Like, I think it's not that there's a special category for AI. I think there's special categories that should be not for AI. Like anything documentary, anything like anything that's supposed to be nonfiction should be as nonfiction as possible. It shouldn't be touched by AI. But I think anything that's fiction don't pander to the industry. If people watch it and consumers like it, it doesn't matter whether it's made with watercolors or with a model or with a film camera or with a digital camera or with an iPhone.
Yeah.
People just want to draw barriers because it protects their jobs a little bit. And I think that's kind of silly. And also it's like, it's interesting to say it has to be human made, because then you have to define what human made means. Like, what if I make the model? What if I make the data set in the model? What if I make the Python in the workflow in the model and the data set in the model? Yeah. And what if that's actually more involved than the VFX process that uses, Nuke and Flame and Maya. Like, what if my process is more hours?
Yeah.
And what if how do you say that the VFX shot is human made, but a shot with a model isn't human made?
Right. Yeah, there must be a I think it's just a simple way to do it. It's like, if the audience is expecting to see work that was only done in camera and you hide to them that this was generated on a computer, then that's disingenuous. Then of course you should be disqualified.
But we already do that. Like, there's already set extensions and green screening where they're like, they're doing like almost everything in the Oscars has some type of digital set extension and some type of green screen and some type of like, comping and cleaning up plates in the background and hiding the actor's wire and stuff like that. So it's like, that's also generative art. And you could also say that's done by a computer. So that's like, to me, that's just an institution saying it has to be human made. But the real gag there is they're gatekeeping the words human made. Like, why does Vanity Fair get to decide what's human made and what's not? Like, they don't. That's just their own fictional rules, so they can gatekeep in the part of the industry and make it the way they want it to. So like, and I get it. Like, I would love to have my stuff featured on Vanity Fair. So like, if they were like, it has to be human made, I'd be like, it has to be human made. Human made is the best, and no AI. But it's like, but they're not in my pocket right now, and so I'm gonna like be honest and say that like, I don't think they should have the right to say what's human made and what's not. They wish they did, and they do if people believe it. But ultimately, like, there's a lot of things that aren't human made that they would probably say is human made, and there's a lot of AI stuff that is human made that they would say it's not just because it's AI. But It's a really gray space.
It's gray space, totally. So before we close, what are you next going to be working on? What's the thing that's got you excited that you're looking to do next?
I'm doing a set of trailers with the production company I'm really excited to work with. That's kind of taking AI concepts directly to sales for studios. And we're testing a lot of new tools and new workflows, chaining those tools together. And then if it goes well with these trailers, I'd love to do my own IP and have my own scripts. Hopefully it can be with this company I'm doing stuff with now. If it's not, I'm going to most excited about my own writing and my own stories and my own art projects. So I'm super excited to have a nice conversation about it face to face, because it's like, I was like, oh, usually people are just like, that's bad, that's dumb, you're not an artist. And I'm like, okay, I lie.
No, I mean, I think that's the beauty of this medium. There's going to be some change, and the change is happening, and there's going to be revenues and skills that we've become accustomed to be able to bill against that are going to change. And maybe it is more fundamental than when we move to digital, non-linear editing or things like that. But on the other hand, I think people like you are showing that there is an avenue where actually there's a new type of revenue, and maybe even a more stable revenue. If you could show up and you've got a trained model and it's part of what you bring to the table as a creator, you're accumulating value in what you do. It's not just your portfolio and the hours that you've invested in a project. You're effectively coming up with a small production team with AI trained content, and maybe that's an exciting new path.
Yeah, and it's also exciting because if you don't have and if you don't want to protect it and you want to make it open source, you can do that too. So you can either monetize something and have more control over monetization, or you can have more control over sharing, and you can share anything. Like, when I released the model on my photography, there was people using it, immediately in different parts of the world. And like, I would have never been able to send that person a camera and give them a photography class and help them understand like, oh, I like the light from this direction. But like, suddenly, like, I helped someone make an image and I was able to share something with them. And then I was also able to take that same model and build it into a workflow and sell it to somebody. So it's like, you can take a tool and you can share it. You could take a tool and you can make money off of it. You can do both. They can coexist. And so I think it's an exciting space to be, whether you're facing clients and closed source stuff, or whether you're facing, open source and public facing, and most importantly, to understand the coexisting of both those spaces.
Wicked. Right. Calvin, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, dude.
Lovely to meet you. Cheers. Thank you.
Then.
All right.